I forgot. Do we have a Patreon, Maria?
Why do we never mention this in the beginning? We need to put it at the start of videos. We get way more patrons when we mention it earlier. Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast, Unresolved Textual Tension. It's me, your host, Maria, and with me is my rugged and handsome co-host, William.
Hey guys, what's up? We're here with yet another review for you guys. And what book are we doing today, Maria?
Today we are doing Sweet Dreams Are Made of Teeth by an author whose name I've once again forgotten. Every time I never, ever
the
will
thing about it
remember.
is that, to be fair, the best thing about this book is the title, and so I don't feel overly like, oh, we have to give him his due.
Richard Roberts,
we need to have words about how you juxtapose imagery in this book. I did not like this book. So the thing about it is that we had meant to do this recording a few days ago, and I hadn't had time to finish the book because my nephews were in town, and I'm not going to give up time with them for this book, and so I didn't finish it. And then once we decided we had to move the recording, I was like, okay, I'll go back and finish it. And then just the thought of having to read it, I was like, no, I'm not doing that. That sounds great. I don't want to do that. This book is it's a mess in a lot of ways. And unfortunately, I found it to be very uncomfortable in certain respects that we're going to have to talk about. I'm going to have to probably dance around a little bit because of YouTube guidelines and TOS. But what were your overall impressions, Maria?
So this book was really weird. In some good ways, it's one of those books that the conceit of it, the like shtick, is so at the forefront that having a plot kind of takes a back seat. In a lot of ways, this feels like a collection of episodic, like each thing follows each other like chronologically and there's no time skips. And yet they feel very, very episodic in nature, where you could clearly cut. It feels almost like a bunch of novellas that have been woven together, a little stream of consciousness in the way the character experiences.
There's a causality between the beginning of each episode and the one that came before, but there's not actually an overriding plot really, or like thing to grab onto. And that's one of the reasons I think the book is so hard to read, is that there isn't an overarching plot. So the tension kind of just comes in and out. And then there's like, it's kind of a love story at times, but also not really.
The main characters, the things that are his plot, and so he does a lot of things where things are happening around him and he is interacting with those things. And that's part of what makes it feel very episodic. And that's one of the things that make it very episodic, is a lot of these things are other people doing something, him interacting with them, another thing is happening, him interacting with it, something is happening, him interacting with it. And honestly, the main character's best friend, who's this guy named Jeffrey, moves the plot more than the actual main character, because the things that feel the most like plot are what Jeffrey's doing versus our main character just kind of going in and out of these scenes and these like smaller events, which makes it hard to propel you through continuing to read. I really read this in chunks of like, I would start listening the plot line of that particular...
Maria has cats
that are going into the closet. Sorry. I would listen to it in the like arcs of the tiny little baby arcs that were happening, and then I'd stop and then I'd have to start listening again. And within their own little mini arcs, especially the ones that were away from a certain character, I actually kind of enjoyed. Like there's the flower getting arc, which wasn't that great, but then a lot of the arcs with Koi, I actually kind of enjoyed. Comparatively to everything else that was happening, the arcs with the angels I thought were better. There's one particular character who I really like as a concept, and I like her on her own, but I do not like her interactions with the main character. Oh, my autofocus is it's having a time.
Going off of what you said, yeah, I found parts of this book work. Like he's clearly a fairly talented writer. He's not like bad at writing, but but the lack of structure really hurts the book. I never found the main character to quite be engaging enough just to follow him through episodes. There's also a tone issue where the book is trying to get a very specific tone and hit a very certain kind of, I don't want to say magical realism because that's not it, or contemporary like fantasy because that's not quite it either. That's part of the problem is I don't know exactly what it's reaching for, but I can feel that it's reaching for a specific tone and it's not clicking. And by virtue of not clicking, the book is a little weird to read, whereas if it was able to click into place, like you can feel it at times almost work in the first third. The second third just felt very muddled, and then I never got to the third, which Maria did though.
The tone I feel like it was trying to hit was the tone of Neil Gaiman's The Sandman.
Yeah, I haven't read it, but that's maybe what I was thinking of. I thought of Neil Gaiman actually.
It definitely feels like it's trying to hit a Neil Gaiman-esque stride in its like world, because what it's presenting a lot of it's kind of the opposite of magical realism, where it's bringing a sense of realism to a completely imaginary dreamscape, and it really does that. Like our main characters are nightmares, and yet there's something that feels very functional about what they do. There's like a city, people go and buy things, and so it takes this very like abstract ephemeral sphere, and then it adds a layer of realism to it, which Neil Gaiman can often do really well, especially in the reverse, taking something real and making it feel magical, but also inserting the magical into the real. That's a lot of Gaiman's shtick. But this is kind of the reverse. It's taking something really magical and crazy and ephemeral and then making it feel a bit more concrete. But it only in a few places does it really hit. And again, for me, it's really either with the angels or this one character named Koi. And like, besides everything else, I thought it really struggled. And the basic premise is we are in the dream world, and the dream world is divided into two places. It's not called the dream world, but there are, in this space, there is the dark, which is a place where dreams are dragged into when there are nightmares, and then there is the light, which is where happy dreams happen. And our main character is a nightmare named Fang. He is the thing that chases you, the mouth full of teeth, sometimes like a wolf or a dog, but like that's his vibe. And he there's a shape-shiftiness to him as he fits one of these molds. And he approaches his nightmares with a sense of artistry, not just trying to instill terror, but to evoke a specific feeling. But there's this idea that like nightmares go into the light, go into a dream, and then drag the dream into the dark. And Fang lives in the dark. He's a mid-level, everybody's demon.
I got almost like a noir, like he's just a mid-level gumshoe doing his job, but he's like hasn't hit the big time yet. Is kind of the feel I got from it, and that's kind of the tone it's aiming for, I think.
It really is. And he's also best friends with one of the best nightmares, like the top of his what he does, named Jeffrey. Real, very normal name. And Jeffrey is a beautiful young boy, like young man, older boy with a mouthful of razor sharp, pointy ass teeth. That's Jeffrey. And Jeffrey goes for really like psychological terror, like this, like Jeffrey does some shit.
But before we get started on the plot, Maria, do we have a Patreon?
Will, I think we do. Like, I am struggling to remember, but I'm almost
We're
positive.
A small channel. We don't make a lot of ad revenue, and yet we make crazy bank on this podcast. How do we do it? Do you think we have a Patreon that offers really cool rewards, like a Discord where cool, sexy people talk amongst themselves?
Oh my God, sign me up.
And you get our videos a day early without ads.
Luxury.
And then one more, we get a book club where you get 2 live streams a month, one of which you guys get to choose. That is a value.
Oh my God, giving agency to our viewers? Say less, William. Say less.
Let's not stun our viewers too much. But if you are interested in making this podcast and supporting independent journalism, the link will be in the description below. Now back to the plot.
This really is kind of 2 stories. It's Fang learning how to interact with females and how to have relationships with females, and Jeffrey deciding to be the best nightmare ever and then leave the dark slash light slash dreamscape as like the ultimate. Like he wants to be an immortal concept. He wants to be like the most famous nightmare. And those two things are the majority of the plot of this book.
And they're not super well tied together,
They're not.
found. And the other thing is, it takes you a while to realize that these are the two plot lines you're following. It would have been better if the book had started with, hey, this is a story about Jeff trying to hit the big time, or hey, this is a story of Fang, trying to get his female relationships in order. And also, this is a first-person book, so you could have just said that kind of a thing. And the first female that we run into is Fang's, what he calls his girlfriend or his muse, which is like an ephemeral woman who just sits in a house and cries.
Yes. There are certain types of dreams that are the remnants of dreamers. Like dreamer. So there are things that can happen in the dreamscape. One, you can be a lucid dreamer, and then you can fuck up dreams. And there's a character named Lucy who I loved, but I wish had been more. Like Lucy is like level 1 or 2 of what I like. I wanted level 8 of Lucy. I wanted a real examination of what being a lucid dreamer who can fuck up dreams is like, and we didn't get that. But anyway, so that's one thing that can happen. Another thing that can happen is you can end up just stuck in the dreamscape and not waking up. So you're a lucid dreamer, but you are almost like now you're a part of the dreamscape. Another thing that can happen is you, because of something traumatic, can have a really powerful dream that exists as a remnant. And Fang's muse is a remnant of someone who used to be a human girl who something obviously very tragic and terrible happened to, and she has a lot of regret tied to that. And what she is, like her as a concept and as a dream, is a house where eyes follow you. There's a lot of mirrors, and there are statues, and the statues are of 4 people regularly. And at the heart of the house in the parlor, there is a beautiful, beautiful, pale, waifish girl, young woman, crying into her hands incessantly. And if she ever moves her hands, God, this autofocus, I have to push it back, Will. And if she ever moves her hands, you realize she don't got no eyelids. She has no eyeballs. There's nothing in her little eye sockets. That's what all the eyes in the house are, is her actually looking at things. And Fang is obsessed with this girl. It's her muse. There is a feeling that she evokes that kind of gives him inspiration, but that he also responds very well to. But she does not ever react to Fang. He goes, he puts his head on her lap, nothing, no change. He talks to her, she never talks back. There are literally points where he does stuff and he was like, I wonder if my muse would be mad. And he was like, let's be real, my muse doesn't know any of this is happening. She don't exist. And that's the first lady. And the thing that he wants out of his muse is to try connect with her or have some sort of interaction to at least know that she knows he is there. So that's female relationship number 1 that he tries to build. Relationship number 2 is the real icky one that I don't love, despite really liking the character.
Oh, what's her name? Self-loathing?
It's self-loathing. The 3 actual relationships are the muse, which I think is Elaine, self-loathing, and Coy.
Yeah, okay, so we got to talk about self-loathing. And this is a lot. Okay, so basically, after he sees his muse, and at this point, you get a sense that, like, he is a predator. He is the predator. He is drawn to kind of like that dark vulnerability, and and I was kind of like, okay, this kind of makes sense. This is kind of funny. This makes sense for who a wolf would have a crush on. Then the author goes a little farther with it, which is that he goes to, like, the dream town, and he visits a Demiurge, which is like a concept person called Self-loathing. And she's basically a hooker, but like not paid. Like that's her role, though. Essentially, is as like in like a she takes patrons and does stuff with them.
It's really weird because none of the Demiurges do anything like this. What it is, and I really wish we would have gotten some clarification about this, but self-loathing, who everybody else calls masochism, which she doesn't like. That's not her shtick. People go to her to hurt her, and she enjoys being hurt. And they're like, that's her thing. So it feels at first like he is going to a whorehouse to see a prostitute, or to see a sex worker, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. And then you see Self-loathing, and at first she appears as like a puppet girl. The initial interaction is there's another patron there who wants to see her. It's a demon. He's like, oh, I'm never gonna see her over this demon. And Jeffrey's there, and he's like, oh, I didn't know you saw Mistress Masochism. And he's like, I'm just like, because Fang's really like quiet, and he's also like
A dork?
Fang's a dork and kind of just like a nice dude, like he's not very assuming. He doesn't think too much of himself. He's quite kind to those around him. But anyway, and he was like, nah, she's busy. I won't be able to get in. And Self-loathing pops out, and she's like, Fang, you're here. Come in. And she tells the demon, like, no, I'm going to take Fang. And Fang's like, why would she pick me? Like, I'm just one of the people that sees her sometimes. Like, we've seen each other a couple times, but it's never been like super serious or anything that's really interesting. And their first interaction is she's like, let me slip into something more comfortable. And you're like, oh God, how is this going to go? Because again, the author has set up a sexual parallel, because what's about to happen is not sexual at all.
Fang's urges to be a predator are sexualized and treated as sexual. Again, that's why I called her a hooker, even though she's not a hooker, but like that's the role she would play in another story in terms of like the spot. And that is probably my biggest problem with this book. I don't get uncomfortable easily. Very little actually, like I was born on the internet, you know what I mean? Very little actually skeeves me out in a sense, like an actual like physical like reaction. And this book manages to do it because there's a constant juxtaposition of Fang's urges and appetites are framed and talked about as though they were sexual, but they're also predatory. And anytime he sees any kind of vulnerability or weakness, he is interested in that in a sexual way. Again, it's not actually sex, but it's coded that way and it's treated that way. And the problem is, at several points, this is just kind of creepy. So like in this one, she turns into
a tiny little kitten.
Yeah, and he like rips and tears essentially
and
at her.
smashes. There's a point where she's kind of scattered all over the place, and a demiurge can't die, and she like smiles and like wags her little tail, like
disconnected the little tail by this point. It's uncomfortable, and then it gets worse because at several points the shape that she takes is young
and feminine.
And there's descriptions of like her skin, like I wanted to bite her skinny wrists or leg.
Thighs. Yeah.
I'm sorry. It just grew. Like, I don't think the author intended it to be that word that I can't say because of YouTube TOS. I don't think he intended that, but it reads like that. And that just juxtaposition of imagery and connection, it grossed me out. It really grossed me out, and it made it hard to read this book.
And there might be some people who read this and didn't get that, but it really did come across for me. Again, he set up the initial scene before you understand what Fang is going to do with Self-loathing, before you find out her name is Self-loathing. He says he's going to go see her. He hopes, like, he's a patron. He's had sessions with her before, and there are other people in line, and he's not. So it sets up the idea that this is almost like a brothel. It also can be seen as like BDSM, like a mistress.
Okay, that's what I was gonna say, because we did read 3 Kushil books, and so there is a way to handle self-loathing and BDSM in a way that is non-toxic. Like, we're not going to kink judge, but the way it's handled here feels uncomfortable and doesn't feel like it's within that metaphor, really.
It really doesn't. It felt more sexual than it felt like. It felt more just like a sexual metaphor than it felt like a BDSM metaphor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely.
It's just really weird because I like Self-loathing as a character and as a concept. And what it is these demiurges are these like almost ultimate like core concepts of humanity. There's the demiurge of self-loathing, demiurge of regret, demiurge of death, demiurge of the hunt, which is like that the Ur hunt, like the original like thing. And so there are these core concepts of life and humanity, and you can challenge, as a being in this dreamscape world, you can challenge one of the demiurges, and if you embody that particular urge more than the actual demiurge, then you get the title. And the demiurge of self-loathing has been the demiurge of self-loathing for a very long time. You get the idea that prior to being the demiurge of self-loathing, she was an old god. Like, there's a point at the end where she's almost described as if she was an old god that has ended up in this position. She also does this interesting thing where she eats things and people and dreams and nightmares, and by eating them, she can take their pain or whatever the regret or self-loathing they have, and she takes it onto herself. So there's a point where, like I said, you can challenge the demiurges to take that title. And I'm mentioning this because I find all of this fascinating. It's a side plot, but I find it fascinating. There's a point where there is somebody challenges her as the demiurge of self-loathing, and it is a zeitgeist for a specific period of human history after one of the great plagues of the Middle Ages.
Bubonic plagues.
Yeah, it feels like one of the zeitgeists surrounding the bubonic plagues. And when she eats him, she starts referring to those things and it's interesting because the zeitgeist, these things were happening, humanity started doing those things, and it became a self-perpetuating cycle where things got worse because of this. The zeitgeist itself isn't necessarily a bad person, and because there's literally a part where she said, humanity made me make them do those things.
You know what it is?
What?
It's like the warp in Warhammer. There's a psychic gestalt realm where your brain activity changes it and embodies it. This is in the Warhammer universe. Okay, cool. Keep going.
Continuing.
No, well, to back it up, yeah, what Maria's saying is true. I actually did like all of this stuff with the demiurges and the kind of ecosystem of the dreams and how they work. And I actually wish that had been more interesting with Fang, because Fang just doesn't really participate with that world that much. The other thing to know about self-loathing is that she is, as her name suggests, very self-loathing a lot of the time and puts herself down a lot. And this is, again, a tone problem, because she will continue to do this throughout the book, but because it's not treated very lightheartedly, there's a way to treat it where she she said something disparaging, and then the tone is but this is just a funny, Eeyore. You know what I mean? There's a way to do this like Eeyore, but the way the book does it increasingly feels toxic as the book goes on, I found, and her relationship with Fang continues. It just increasingly felt kind of toxic and gross, and that's how those things are in real life, but I don't necessarily think it's how the author wanted it to read.
I agree completely. It's also interesting because Fang and her refer to what they do as playing with each other, which, again, I feel like the author is trying to make a BDSM parallel, because BDSM is often referred to as play. Again, does not land very well. Again, we read Kushil, we love, watch those videos. Gina talks very much about how refreshing it is to see, but this does have a, because there's a point where he's talking to another character named Lily, who is a fallen angel, and he's describing the three women in his life, and he was like, it's complicated. I love my girlfriend, but I keep interacting with these other girls, and I'm worried I'm cheating on my girlfriend. And Lily is like, why are you taking, number one, she's like, why are you taking a human concept and applying it to yourself? You're a fucking nightmare. What do you mean you're cheating? But number two, she asks him, what are the things you get out of these three women? His muse, he loves and inspires him. Self-loathing, he likes to play with, and she likes playing with him. So it is spun as a physical thing. There is something physical here, and, a friendship. And then there's this character named Koi, who he can create dreams with and who inspires him. I almost wish they had set this up differently, because Koi feels like he inspires her way more than his muse does. His muse invigorates him.
His muse, to me, felt like I kept expecting a thing where it's okay, she's a statue. She's not going to do anything. She is the thing he needs to move past, because I didn't feel like she inspired him. You're right. And again, I don't know what happens in the last third, but it didn't seem to be heading in that direction.
And it doesn't. Even once she has her big thing of what ends up happening with her, it's not inspiring, but Koi definitely feels inspiring. And Koi is a fantasy that he met in the light who was fascinated by him, a creature of the dark who happened to be in the light, and followed him into the dark and decides she's going to try being a nightmare for a while. And they create dreams together. They create nightmares together, but nightmares that don't always necessarily scare the dreamer, but just have the dreamer experiencing different emotions. But it's like a challenging, like it's not straightforward. It's not straight terror. They're challenging.
Almost cathartic is how I saw it.
Exactly. Very cathartic dreams. And it excites Fang. It's unique. He's never done it before. And it's this fascinating thing for him. And so Lily points out, well, you've described 3 different relationships that don't at all, like what you get from the one doesn't take away from the other. So like you can have all 3. You just need to take each woman with where they are. And that's his big thing. Also, his arc is going to be becoming a really good nightmare by going his own path and not following Jeffrey's path. But his main thing is these 3 women and learning how to connect with them and have like kind of healthier relationships with them. I don't know how successful that was. And I don't even want to say have healthier relationships, but just have functional relationships with these women. Self-loathing is the one that I think is the weakest because, like Will said, they begin to feel a little toxic at certain points. There's a huge thing of self-loathing thinking she is bad for Fang, but Fang being like, no, you're not. You're putting yourself down. But there is a certain extent where I kind of get what self-loathing is saying about it. And she always talks from a place of concern for Fang, like, you shouldn't see me because I'm going to use you, because I'm going to manipulate you, and Fang being like, but you're not actually, I don't think you would actually do that. And we're never really given a solid clue about the actual extents to which she would go. There's this point where she was like, I was going to eat your girlfriend. And he was like, no, you weren't. You weren't going to do that. Why would you do that? Like, I don't believe you. And she's like, I was. And he was like, go ahead, do it now. And she doesn't. And you're never really, like, he is very sure. But me as a reader, I was a little like...
That was my feeling as well. And that goes kind of back to the tone problem, which is like, is she Eeyore? Is she not? And the ambiguity between the two is not very clear. It's not like the author's playing around with the ambiguity and like, should you see this as a toxic relationship? What are the boundaries that would separate a toxic one from a non-toxic one? It feels ambiguous in the way that I think I know what the author thinks, but that's not always backed up by the text. It also, their relationship has a certain amount of like, as funny as it is, almost manic pixie girl-ish about it, where like he's like, I'm just a normal nightmare who's just mid-level, not doing good, and she's like, but I love you, and like for some reason that we never really understand, like it's not explained why she likes him, right?
Compared to all of her patrons, he's the only one who genuinely cared about her. Like during their play sessions, he wasn't just getting his own enjoyment, he also cared about her and her enjoyment out of it. And that for her meant a lot because a lot of people don't treat her as a person. They treat her more as a concept, but Fang sees her as a person. So that was something it talked about, which I do get. Like, yeah, that's significant. As someone who has dated a lot on dating apps, ooh, man. Are there times where you don't feel like an actual person?
Tell me about it. It's so hard. Hello, darkness, my old friend. I'm here to speak with you again.
Talk with you again. So there's that part of the plot. And the most successful branch of that tri-pronged little fork is Koi. And that fantasy from the dream world who comes. She comes to be a nightmare. She enjoys it. She enjoys crafting these cathartic things. The dreams with Koi are the most creative and engaging. And I enjoyed them a lot. But then they kill Koi. So background, because I need to explain what Jeffrey's been doing. Jeffrey has decided he wants to create dreams that will affect the real world. And in the first third of the book, you don't actually know. He goes on a quest to make this guy do something that his dreams affect him so much, he enacts something in the real world. That is the goal. So Jeffrey starts targeting this guy, focusing in on him, fucking up his dreams.
Making him do bad things in the dreams.
Yes. Such as there's a point where it starts with it's a guy, and the guy's female friend, who is either his girlfriend or wife, you're not really sure. It's eventually you find out it is his wife. like is eating his face, and then he eats his wife, and then like he keeps giving him dreams where he's eating his wife and hurting the people he loves over, like, and just like targeting this guy over and over. And then he uses self-loathing, and I don't get why she did this, because she was like, you used me for your friend, but like Fang didn't ask, Jeffrey asked. Like, I don't understand why. Anyway, and Jeffrey uses self-loathing to get this guy, to push him past the point, like to kind of snap him mentally, to get him to do something bad in the real world. And when that happens, it opens a portal. Number one, it drags the darkness into a place where the light was, because like they have to go into the light to find this dream, and the darkness is just dragged all the way. So he shifts the border of the darkness, and it opens like a little like portal briefly, and it's this really intense thing, and it puts him on the radar of this girl named Lucy. Lucy is that lucid dreamer I was talking about earlier. Lucy's goal in life is to fuck up nightmares. Specifically, nightmares she thinks that are taking it too far in their haunting of humans. And for Lucy, she says at a couple points, dreams are a place where people go to escape. How dare you take this piece from them? And Jeffrey is now on Lucy's radar. Consequently, Fang is now on Lucy's radar because she knows that Fang was helping Jeffrey. I should also state, Fang does not like this plan. He is not here for it. He doesn't get why Jeffrey is really doing this. He knows Jeffrey wants to make a name for himself, but he like, and throughout the entire thing, he keeps helping Jeffrey, but he doesn't like what they're doing, and it's real bizarre. I don't know why.
How did you feel about Lucy's voice in the book? Because one of the things about the audiobook I was going to mention, I don't like her voice, but one of the things that kind of made me uncomfortable in what we were talking about before is that the narrator is male. So when he's doing female voices, and young female voices, which is what he chooses to do for self-loathing, it feels very caricatured, and I felt like that added to how uncomfortable I was with it. Whereas if I was just reading it, I would be less or more comfortable with it.
I agree. Lucy's voice was caricatured in the way that she didn't feel real.
Very Southern.
Yeah, it's very Southern and very like bombastic, which I didn't love. I thought Lucy's voice was a disservice to the character. I would have preferred if it had felt just a bit more normal young girl. So Lucy is going after old Jeffrey, and eventually, through Fang and Koi doing a lot together, there are these people called the Dream Painters, and they are like these animals with wings. Like they're just normal animals, but they have wings, and they paint dreamscapes on the sides of buildings, and they'll do it in the light, they'll do it in the dark, they do it wherever they are, and they keep painting a lot of the things that Fang is doing, including dreams that he has with Koi. And this also puts Fang on Lucy's radar. Fang and Koi end up getting targeted by Lucy, who looks at Koi, knows she isn't actually a nightmare, but wants to punish Fang, and so kills Koi. And as a lucid dreamer, she can do that, where normally like another dream can't really kill another dream. Like it would take a lot, but a dreamer can. And it affects Fang a lot. He's really upset by it because he really enjoyed Koi. He enjoyed making dreams with her. And he ends up making an almost bargain with Self-loathing, which is that she will tell him how to bring Koi back to life if he promises never to see her again. And he's basically like, no, I do not promise to never see you again, but it also tell me how to save Koi. And what it is it's to contact this girl named Anna. There's a lot of females in this book. Anna is another lucid dreamer, but she's stuck in the dream world. Like she has almost fully realized in the dream world. She can't wake up in the real world anymore. Basically, it's to ask Anna to dream Koi, because dreamers can create things. There are times where he goes into dreams and it already has its own atmosphere. It has its own setting that the dreamer has created, versus a really unformed dream where the nightmare can create everything. And sometimes humans dream themselves into the dark instead of being dragged there, just because of what they are subconsciously dealing with. And so dreamers can create stuff. And so he asks Anna to dream of Koi. And he has a kiss mark on his cheek because she kissed his cheek. He gives it to her and was like, make her. And she makes almost like a copy of her. And it's described as like a 2D black and white photo of her, and when she takes a fish form, instead of being like a happy golden koi fish, she is now like a catfish. And while it's not exactly koi, it is koi enough that they're still able to make like really cool dreams and stuff. And she ends up coming to herself and becoming a more individualized creature by the end of it. And his relationship with her is the best fully realized because it feels really real and functional.
It's interesting because I didn't get to that part in the book. Koi just died, which I felt like happened too quickly, but it makes sense then that her resurrected one is the one he has more of a relationship with. That actually does sound interesting, but I just
Yeah.
didn't get there, which should give you an idea of how little of the book it is. So I don't know, because this book is so episodic that like a lot can happen in one episode because it's just devoted to that one thing.
Exactly, because there are a couple of little baby arcs that are just him with new koi going into dreams. Like at first thinking, because like at first he like asks her about stuff and she's like, I don't know, what should we do? I don't know, what should we do? And then she starts getting inspired on her own again. And there are points where, because new koi has an incredible ability to make things in the dark because she was a fantasy, and she like there are times where her ability to make massive structures at the drop of a hat saves them. And so she's her and Fang are like one of the best parts of this book as far as the three-pronged relationship with women thing, by far the strongest. His dream muse girl, her name's Elaine, eventually, who was it? I think it's Lily. One of the characters frees her and lets her die peacefully.
Lily, by the way, is an angel. For some reason, there are demons and angels in this world. That's an interesting end to her.
It really was, because he's really upset about it. But then she's like, I gave her the one thing she wanted, which was peace. Like, she can go and just be dead now. She doesn't have to be living in this, like, limbo of regret forever. And he's like, oh, you're right. If I had known, I wish I could have given it to her.
It sounds like actual character growth really actually happened towards the end.
It did.
Instead of just like nothing.
No, it really did, because he comes to terms with the fact that as much as he wanted to keep her around, the best thing for her was for her to go into this other space, and him wishing he would have put that together enough to have done it himself instead of having like Lily do it. And it's nice because he no longer has the space. Like, her house is something that he went back to over and over again in the dreamscape, and he no longer has that. And so by the end, it's like self-loathing is still there, and then he has new koi. Yeah, and then there's this whole like plot where like the angels are mad that the dark opened up a portal to like that where you can travel through, and they're like, who did this? And they're after Jeffrey, and Lily's like, nah, don't do this, what are you doing, guys? And Lily is really also interesting, but her really interesting stuff doesn't come until the very end, where like there's an angel who thinks he is doing the work of God by coming to challenge death, because the demiurge of death, which they refer to as the demiurge of,
I think it's death, if I'm remembering correctly, because I did get to that part where he challenges him and just gets floored.
Yes. There was another one where somebody was, an angel was challenging the demiurge of revenge, but it was called justice, which I thought was interesting, depending on how you're looking at it. But anyway, yes, there's an angel who comes to tackle the demiurge of death because death has too long existed in the dark. And Lily's like, God doesn't want you to do that, my guy. The other angels think that's what you should do. You're gonna die. But there's a point where later where a bunch of angels come to kill Jeffrey, take out, like, and they basically decide the dark is fucked. We're going to get rid of the whole thing. We're going to destroy the entire darkness and just let it repopulate. This is the only way to make sure that no random portals are being opened up. And Lily makes a comment, my family's very possessive about who can open up portals and when. And she fights for them, and she becomes, in like the last fourth, way more complicated because of her position as this, like, she still loves the angels and that world, but she has this kind of loyalty to the dark, and also realizing its importance and why it's necessary, and that this dichotomy and war between them is unnecessary. And so she becomes this really cool, tragic character in the last half.
It makes you wonder why we messed around for so long with Fang's love life. Like, that's the thing, is there's two books here, and one of them is not very interesting, and the other is actually kind of interesting about the politics of this dreamscape.
It is so much more interesting, and it was so cool, and like the whole thing. Anyway, so the other thing that happens towards the very end is Jeffrey. So Jeffrey opened up that portal and got that guy to, like, I think murder his wife. I'm not exactly sure. Earlier, you never find out exactly what Jeffrey makes him do, but the important thing is that he was able to, through dreams, affect this man's real life. And so now his next thing that he wants to do is he wants to open up a portal to the real world so he can pass through it and exist in the real world. He's real fascinated by it. And the way he does this is, once again, by targeting someone's dreams and fucking them up so much that it begins to affect their actual life, to the point where the person no longer knows what is real and what is dreams, and that they are awake and dreaming at the same time, and that will open a portal into the real world. This was kind of rough to read because you really felt bad for whoever this nameless woman was, because her shit gets fucked up real good. Like, there's literally a point where they can't get into her dream anymore. It is in the light and they just can't get in because she went to a doctor to get medication.
Oh, interesting.
To protect herself. And they have to find, like, a backwards way in, and he uses...
And Fang is still helping?
Yes! I hate this!
Yeah, that was the odd part, because the thing is, Fang mentions at one point that, like, dreams aren't supposed to affect people in the real world. Like, that's part of the deal, is that they just stick here and they get forgotten in the morning. So he was always like, ideologically I'm not with Jeffrey, but he, I guess, continues to be throughout the entire book.
And, like, how it starts, which really sucks, is this woman has a lot of dogs, and she has a dream where it's her and all of her doggies, or just a lot of doggies. You don't necessarily know that they're hers, but it's a happy dream. And he puts Fang in it. And Fang goes into the body of, like, a small dog and then morphs its body around his face. So then Fang takes over, like, because of Fang, all of the other dogs in the dream start snarling and attacking her. And she wakes up and suddenly she has an intense fear of dogs. This affects her by affecting her relationship with her dogs. You get the idea that eventually she gets rid of them. But then Jeffrey keeps using Fang in her dreams to the point where, like, people she likes suddenly have Fang's face and are attacking her. And so this dog face is just haunting her nightmares. And he ends up smuggling Fang into one of her medicated dreams, which are supposed to be protected. And what they do is they said, we need to make her not trust her doctor so she stops taking this medication. And so what Fang does is he infiltrates the dream. And in the dream, the good dream, the doctor is there kind of as a protecting presence. Like, her subconscious is like, the doctor helped me. And instead of it being a personification of the medication, the doctor is the personification of the medicine. But then Fang goes into that and makes the doctor's face his face and, like, stretches it so it's like his muzzle, but the doctor's face, and, like, bursts through. And so now she's scared of the doctor.
I hate this. I'm so glad I didn't get to this part.
It's really rough to read because, like, they fuck this woman up. She tries to get help. They scare her enough that she stops taking the medication because she starts blaming the medication.
Okay, here's the thing, is that, like, one of the reasons that the tone needs to be lighthearted for this book is that fundamentally what they're doing is emotional terrorism and really rough. And if somebody in the real world did this, it would be very, very bad. So you need that dream layer of, like, oh, this doesn't have really an effect on them in the real world. And also, we're not supposed to take the events in this book literally and as seriously. So to then start having it actually emotionally affect her is weird.
And there's a point, because Fang always mentions in dreams he can tell what is real from someone's memory and what they've interacted with in real life versus what is dream made, because the real things are very vivid and, like, put together versus dream things, which are kind of amorphous. And there's a point where Fang goes into her dreams, and this is, like, at the end, like, what Jeffrey wants to do is about to happen. There's also a point where Jeffrey poisons him kind of with this pain bird that is connected to the woman's pain, and he puts it in Fang, and it fucks Fang up for a while, and then Fang has to throw it up, and Fang's like, why did you use me like that, bro? And he's like, I'm sorry, I didn't know it was going to negatively affect you, forgive me. And Fang's like, I forgive you, bro. And I'm just like, fuck Jeffrey, man, this guy's a psychopath. Anyway, and so they're in the dream, and he realizes that the setting of the dream, almost everything is real because she is awake and she is having a waking dream, and the thing is happening, that cross section of her dreaming and being awake and not knowing which one is real is happening, and all the people around her end up with Fang's dog face, and it's just fucked up. The portal opens, Jeffrey goes through, it closes, da 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 da, da, stuff happens, and basically the ending is Fang is now a really cool, because a bunch of the like nightmares were like gonna, I don't know, rebel or something, and Fang scares them into submission, basically, and now everybody's like, ooh, Fang's the new top nightmare. And Lucy stops coming around because what you hear, and this is like told from Lily's point of view, like Lily pays attention to what's happening in the real world, and there is a newspaper article about there was this girl named Lucy who had been being abused by her parents. It doesn't say, what it says is in the newspaper article, there was this young girl, her parents died, but after her parents died, she suddenly went from being a very ill-tempered, not great young girl to being sweet and normal. And the idea, because previously in the dream, you have seen Self-loathing showed an image of Lucy, but as a very skinny, kind of beaten young girl. And you get the idea that Lucy uses dreams to escape her not great reality. And then you make the inference that her parents are abusing her. And Jeffrey, when he goes into the real world, murders her parents. And then Lucy no longer terrorizes nightmares.
It would have made more sense if they'd had some kind of like a deal or something like that.
Yeah. Or if
like
he
that had been set up,
liked Lucy, or if he had realized Lucy was being abused, because like Fang's the one who sees this interaction with Self-loathing where you see that she's an abused girl who's escaping shit, not Jeffrey. So it's a big leap. Like, it would have been interesting if Fang had been the one to get out and he then went and saved Lucy. But that's not what happened. It's fucking Jeffrey.
That's weird. Okay, so the book ends with like just, do they need to like stop Jeffrey from doing this again? Is there like sequel bait or like...
He is just in the real world. So there is this one line that Lily says, which is, the last time a dream entered the real world was 600 years ago when Dracul entered the real world, and nobody's really sure what happened to him once he went to the other side, but people still talk about him. And the idea is Dracula was a dream, and he was immortalized once he went into the real world. His legacy as a dream took an even greater hold to the point where he became mythology in the real world. So I guess Jeffrey is now going to be that, because the literal end of the book, and it's weird because it's literally just Lily talking. So here it is. So Lily uses a scryer to look into she knew she'd found the newspaper. She wanted the photograph on the front page said it all. She was several years older, and the black and white disguised the copper color of the pigtails, but that was Lucy. Bruised, starved, with a broken nose, but the face was the same, and the expression that stared challengingly at the camera was so very her. Around her neck hung a tooth that could have come off a dinosaur. It's Fang's tooth. She pulled it out of his mouth from a dream. Apparently, she took it into the real world with her. Tied on a loop of string, Lily couldn't help but smile as she read over the article. This is how this book ends, which has been told from Fang's point of view the entire fucking time. Lily couldn't help but smile as she read over the article. The mysterious slaying of a local couple had taken an even stranger turn. The bodies had been partially eaten by the murderer. Jeffrey ate a lot of people. And when their daughter was taken into custody, she showed signs of him having been badly abused over a period of years. All of this was still unconfirmed, naturally, but an inside source reported that instead of the quiet, withdrawn girl reported by neighbors, the daughter blossomed after her parents' death, and the only concern was that she might be too aggressive to mix with other teenagers yet. It was, Lily thought, also very perfect. But that was the past. The future was opportunity. Running her thumb over the imitation newsprint, she thought wistfully of the mortal world and the humans in it. Her family was huddling behind both gates, watching each other suspiciously and not wanting to make the first move. It looked like Lucy had no need to punish dreams anymore. It was time for Lily to look into opening a real proper portal at last. Her way, of course. So, yeah, there kind of is sequel bait for Lily.
Yeah, okay.
Where's Fang?
This actually kind of makes sense in terms of how incoherent the book is up until this point, where it's just the author sticking together a bunch of ideas and not really caring about how they come together coherently. It's just a lot of it's like a soup where none of it is really mixing well. That's not really what a soup is. But you, my Greek friend, come up with a food metaphor. But like it's just none of it really works together, and it's weird. It's like he almost didn't try.
I do want to say, because I just remembered this, how Fang's actual story ends, because it does have an actual ending, is after all of this stuff happens with Jeffrey, he's like, I'm gonna do me. And he decides to go to the light and try being a fantasy for a while with Koi. So Koi had been like, I want to go see the dark and try being a nightmare for a while, old Koi. And now new Koi is there, and she wants to go back to the light to kind of find out who she is, because she knows that there had been a previous version of her. She died. She's beginning to get like flashes of what she was, but she wants to go into the light. And Fang says, I'm going to come with you. I'm going to go see what I am in the light. And there's a point where Koi says to him, like, I don't want you to change your colors, because he's this big black thing. And she goes, why don't you add silver, though? Black and silver is really cool, and I think it would make you really beautiful. And he goes, yeah, that sounds great. And they decide to go into the light.
That is actually kind of an interesting ending.
It's a great, again, Koi and Fang are the best part. There's the politics of the world, and then there's Koi and Fang. Two best sections of this book. Should have been more of both.
Well, they also should have tied together more. Like,
Yes.
so I mean, I guess that's the book then. Again, it's such a mess, and certain aspects of it I imagine people would find very triggering. I just found very uncomfortable. I don't know what the author was thinking. Like as I was reading this, I'm like, the author can't not know like I could see as a reader maybe not understanding, or maybe just not catching that stuff viscerally, but like the author has to know the imagery he's using is really loaded.
Again, there were parts of this I actually really enjoyed, and or moments that were weirdly beautiful. And again, Will made the point, this guy isn't a bad writer. You know, that's not what we're saying. There's just such a muddle. It's like cloudy water, and like when you get to, you know, like sometimes when like sand and stuff is kicked up in water, and then you get to a clear patch and you're like, wow, this is beautiful, and then all of a sudden you're back in like the mud and the sand in the water, and it's just like a mess. That's kind of what reading this book was like. Like you would enter these moments of like things being really beautiful, and then there was these really just muddy parts where the concepts weren't handled as well as they could be. I think this book suffers from too many things syndrome, where it had too many things it was trying to do and trying to get across. Again, the exploration of Fang and how to have different relationships with these women, that, and also almost like how polyamory shouldn't, like how loving multiple people at the same time doesn't take away anything from anyone. Like that was definitely a message that was trying to happen. The politics of the dreamscape and heaven and the dark and the angels and demons, and then Jeffrey and Jeffrey's thing, and then Fang and Koi exploring each other and these different spaces as opposing forces, but then realizing that they're not actually that different. They both are trying to create emotional reactions out of dreams, and though that's too many things. And there's a couple of things like the politics stuff, which is interesting, and then Koi and Fang exploring each other and these different spaces and realizing they're not that different, that work really well. And then the other stuff just doesn't. And it's I think the scope of this needed to be pared down. I think this could have been a novella. I do not think it should have been as long as it was.
Definitely, I think that's entirely fair. I looked at the author's Goodreads, and they had written like a whole like young YA series called like Please Don't Tell My Parents I'm a Supervillain, and then that's the form of all the titles is Please Don't Tell My Parents like I Have a Nemesis and stuff like that. So I could see like how he went from writing that to trying to write something more ambitious, and just couldn't quite figure out how to make that work. Honestly, I don't know where his editor was, because his editor should have read this and been like, look, dude, this has problems. There's promise here, but you need to focus in on a couple of elements. I guess they were just MIA, or maybe they just didn't care. That can also be it. So it's not a great foray into adult for an otherwise, I think, fairly talented writer.
I wouldn't try write this book.
Too much. Too many things.
It's too many things. And again, it is really ambitious, taking conceptual things, giving them personality, and also, again, giving them that sense of mundanity, but also that sense of like magic. That is a tall, tall order. He created his own mythos to this. And a lot of it feels familiar and feels like concepts we know, but it really is, and it's a big ask. It's a really big ask, and I think you hit the nail on the head, Will. It is not necessarily a bad writer at all, but where this book was just too big.
I think we hit most of the big things. Also, no one's going to watch this video. So there's that.
This book isn't popular. It has like 25 reviews on Goodreads. It's like,
I think they should restrict titles to books that aren't, you know what I mean? Like, because this is such a good title, and then the book is not very good. Not Good for Maidens, also a great title, terrible book. There needs to be like an SCC for it, you know, somebody who like practices and guidelines, who monitors titles to, and cover art as well. Cover art shouldn't be on bad books.
I think it would be interesting if a couple people read this book because of this. Because again, like I'm sure us talking about this, some of you are like, that sounds weird and cool and interesting, and also I want to see how uncomfortable that thing is, so I'm going to read it anyway. And it would be interesting if this author gets a little bump because we reviewed it. That would be
kind of cool. If you do read this because of us, or you just have read this before, let us know what you think, because I am kind of curious to see what other people thought, if that kind of thing that made me so uncomfortable pings for you guys, because it just may not. Which elements of this book, of the many elements of this book, worked for you? Yeah.
Bye, guys.